Okay.
Yeah, so we had the question, as I mentioned earlier, what happens during reprogramming, whether there is a certain relapse after reprogramming or not, because it certainly seems there is a relapse, because in most of the studies that we see, we only see a significant effect in lifespan increase if the partial reprogramming therapy is administered on a repeated basis until end of life. And there's a couple of studies that did short duration of reprogramming or a single bout of reprogramming, and they didn't have very sizable effects. So like intuitively, that to me implies that there is, after you stop expressing reprogramming factors, there's something that restores the baseline epigenetic age or gene expression pattern, whatever you use your favorite kind of biomarker that's driving, cell function. So, and we've chatted with some people in the field, including Steve and Reason, about have there been actual studies that try to answer this question. Does the cell restore its epigenetic age in vivo after you stop reprogramming it? And so if there are some implications, I think far-reaching implications, that if that is actually the case, is there then some sort of memory that remembers the age of the cell? And of course, the ECM people are going to say, of course, it's the matrix. The ECM is what actually drives aging and what remembers the age of the cell. Other people might say it's a neuroendocrine mechanism, that there might be like setting a driver rhythm, like there's a driver rhythm for your circadian clock. There could be a driver rhythm for your aging clock. And there are far-reaching, we think, implications of that. So this is a question that we'd like to answer, and it's actually, not that complex to answer. There's just a few studies that you could do, or even add some additional data points to the existing studies of reprogramming in mice, where you do time points after you stop reprogramming. You do tissue biopsy of several tissues, several days after you stop reprogramming, and check epigenetic age, and you can check other biomarkers and see, is there a relapse or not? And this was. You want to add something?
No, it's just if there is this kind of relapse, it's probably important to figure out what it is, what's causing it, and why, and that might lead to novel therapeutic targets. And if there is no such relapse, then partial reprogramming does come off looking better. But it's really just a call for people to pay attention to kind of maybe null results or negative results or things they otherwise wouldn't pay attention to, because most of the partial reprogramming work is dosing until you see an effect in the long run. The question is, what happens if you dose once and eventually see a regression of effect? That might be just as informative.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's no organization that needs to be started here. It's just, experiments that are between $250,000 and $1 million that other groups are going to be doing already, and I think they're of interest to the broader community.
Yeah.
If you're done, we can take longer questions. How about that?
Yeah.
Yeah? Cool. Then thank you. Okay, final round of questions. Joe.
What was the original impetus to start this group? Like, what observations are there out there that there is a bounce back effect?
We've heard from a couple people, but there's a Browder et al. Paper that showed that you need repeat dosing to see long-term effect from partial reprogramming, which kind of, that's not an intuitively obvious result. So we're trying to see whether anyone actually has data showing that there is a bounce back effect. I think there's broadly been some sense, I know we talked to Steve, that there probably is some, but nobody's ever collected data specifically on the bounce back.
The bounce back goes away if you get all the way to pluripotency, right?
Well, then that becomes a teratoma if you go all that way.
Another assumption from it takes repeat dosing is that each one just only buys you a little increment, so they have to add up to a lot by the time you're done.
Then I'd love to look into that a bit more, because the question is, all right, what's the actual lowest biological age achieved in tissue, and then how close to chronological age does it actually get back to? And the closer you find the tissue bouncing back to chronological age, especially in maybe a longer-lived animal, the more you say, well, maybe there's some kind of state representation of age as opposed to local tissue damage causing accelerated aging from this, rejuvenated baseline.
And if there wasn't a bounce back, that even if you got small increments, I would assume that you'd see a massive increase in lifespan that way. Like if the baseline didn't get restored, you do repeated partial reprogramming, you do it weekly intervals. Certainly aging doesn't, like accumulation of damage doesn't work on a weekly increments. So to me, the fact that you don't observe that and you can only extend lifespan like 50% in progenitor mice or 20% in wild type mice, if that implies that there is a bounce back. You're like working uphill against something that kind of pushes you down.
The observation for this, is there like a graph of data or something in the paper that they showed? So like there's a bounce back, but like I think what for his point is like if you do repeated results, does it bounce back all the way to what the normal curve would look like versus just going up a little bit?
But there's no data on the actual bounce back of say genetic age. It's just
people are dosing to efficacy. And I think the lack of efficacy is an interesting story because if there is something like central regulation of aging, that's a really important source of targets and really important research direction. If there's not, and also it's basically, it'd be a free lunch for the field. It'd be certainly a lot more convenient for everyone if there was some, like a central representation of age that could be targeted. And so if it can be found out whether there is or isn't one in a short amount of money, that seems like a good investment. If not, we're just trapped in the entropic world where we're all slowly decaying. That is the case anyway, but more or less.
So this is really important, but it's also like if you're correct, if your underlying thesis is correct, there's a bunch of organizations that will probably implode because of it. So that's why there might be pushback against this. But I think this is really important to understand is is it going to be a treatment until death type of thing, or does it actually work?
Why implode? That's the best analogy for a pharmaceutical.
Oh God!
And we're at time. Thank you guys.